Let's just consider the strategy they use, where they try and have as few people in on this information as possible for obvious reasons. And you know, if we look at Tony Blair and Ian Blair, you believe that they probably knew the whole scope of the false flag terror attack. You think that?
Well, the evidence points to that.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say conclusively that they did know.
Right.
For obvious reasons, only they know whether they did know, and the people that would have told them if they, you know, if they did know. I can't definitively say that they did know, but all the evidence points to the fact that they had foreknowledge of it, which means that they must have been in on it to have foreknowledge. Tony Blair came out immediately and started blaming the Muslims.
Yes.
When the news media were reporting that it was power surges that had caused these explosions and the fatalities and the carnage. So he came out and said, "Oh, it was the Muslims." So, you know, how would he know? How would he know it was the Muslims unless he was in on the plot? And the same with Blair, with Ian Blair, because Ian Blair said about 4 miserable bombers. And then he suddenly corrected himself, realized he'd put his foot in it, and said, "I'm not saying there were 4 bombers." You know, so it's very difficult to believe that they weren't in on it. Looking at, when you look at the dispassionately, look at the evidence.
I had a close look at Blair's first sort of announcement to the press when the news came out, and if you just study his body language, to me, he's definitely covering something up. He's almost acting. Very similar to the way that he dealt with the Diana death, the way that he was trying to turn on the tears almost. It was just so disingenuous when you actually look at it. But that's my own personal view of his, you know, the way that he puts himself across, that he's false, basically. Now, but if you go further down the chain of command, then, if we consider the police, how far, and this is very presumptuous, we don't actually know, we'll put that disclaimer on this, but in order to explain the evidence, do you think there are any other police other than Blair would be in on it then? Or do you think it would just go down perhaps one more level? Or because I've got friends in the police, you know, and they don't entertain any of this false flag terror, but they're not high ranking, you know, maybe inspector level, that sort of thing.
What you mean, they don't accept that there was a conspiracy?
Yes.
That it was false flag?
Correct, yeah.
They believe the government story.
But they don't look at they don't watch the film, you see, as you said. You see?
That's the difficulty. You see, that's why I sent the film out everywhere. You know, by now I've made hundreds. I'm still making copies and handing them out. And I've sent out hundreds. I looked on the internet for the addresses of all the mosques in London and throughout the UK. And I obviously can't, you know, I obviously could not afford to send a DVD to every one of them. But I sent copies to a large number of mosques, asking them to show the film to their congregation and get them to make copies, and including, I sent one to Dr. Nassim at the Birmingham Mosque, which is the second biggest one in the UK.
Okay.
And he made 2,000 copies, at least 2,000 copies, and gave them out. And there are other people who contacted me and said that they were doing the same in their areas. So the message is getting out, but the difficult thing is you can give a film to people, but you can't make them watch it. It's like the horse and water situation. There are people that I know locally that I gave copies to, and they still haven't watched them. You know, and I say, "Have you seen the film?" "Oh no, I haven't had time." You know, so what do you do? But it's the ripple effect that if people have to get on board, you know, and they have to help and spread the message and let people make their own mind up. You know, let them watch the film and make their own mind up whether they think I'm right or whether they think I'm wrong. You know. But they need to be given that opportunity. which is why I'm hoping that you're going to be helping with this program to bring that about.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, they've recently announced that there's going to be an inquest. What are your thoughts on that, Muad'Dib?
Well, they've all the way through. They have been calling these 4 young men the bombers, okay, instead of the alleged bombers. And it always starts off the same, and it started off on the day of 7/7 in 2005. The first news reports were that started to mention about these 4 young men were the alleged bombers, and then it very quickly it goes from alleged, they drop the alleged, and then suspected, and then it becomes the bombers, and then from then on it's the bombers. Every time there's any news goes out, it's the bombers. These guys, okay, I am convinced that these people were innocent and that they were patsies. They have never been tried in a court of law. There's not been an independent inquiry that has proved in any way that they were guilty of carrying out these atrocities, because that's what they were, atrocities. But also with this inquest, they have said that they were going to hold the inquest for all 56 people who were killed, 4 of whom were these 4 young men, of course. There were 52 members of the public, and there were the 4 alleged. And I will not call them the bombers because it's never been proved, and I'm sure they didn't, as sure as I can be that they didn't do it. And so then apparently the relatives of the deceased were up in arms that how can you include these 4 men in with the inquest for, our loved ones.
Right.
Well, those 4 young men are also the loved ones of their families.
Yeah. And
if they are innocent, as I believe, then, they've just as much right to be in that inquest as anyone else.
Yeah.
I heard recently that the terms of this inquest, the survivors and the relatives of the deceased have been waiting for this inquest in order to get their questions, some of which may be what I've asked in the film, to get their questions answered. And I understand that they've now been told they will not be allowed to question any witnesses. So they have been kept waiting, and they've been very, very patient. They've been kept waiting for almost 5 years. And it probably will be, it'll be more than 5 years by the time, because they're talking about October, I think, for this inquest.
Okay.
And so they've been waiting patiently to be able to ask the questions that they want answered. And they've been told that they will not get the opportunity to ask these questions, so they're all very upset about it, and quite rightfully so, because the inquest can also be another whitewash.
Yes.
We've seen so many of them. We saw the David Kelly and others.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard
and they can set the frame of reference for the questions, and so that the questions they don't want to answer never get asked in the first place. So they don't have to refuse to answer because the question never made it into the hearing.
Yeah, sometimes the best way to cover something up is to have an inquiry, as long as the inquiry is run by the correct person.
Exactly that, yeah.
Okay, then. Now, I believe that you sent the movie to some of the people who's died, family members. Now, have you got a feel for what sort of percentage of those people actually agree with you?
I haven't, because there's been I've had no contact from them.
Yeah. I mean, I'd quite like to get involved with contacting them and perhaps doing a survey of what they actually truly believe. That would be good to get a snapshot of the victims' families. Would you agree with that? That it would be.
I would love you to do that. I think that needs to be done.
Yeah. Because
and it's never going to get done by mainstream media. So it's down to people like you. to actually to actually do it.
Because it's all well and good, as in the BBC conspiracy files, they took one or two of the victims and they put them on a pedestal and basically represented all of the victims with that one particular view. And I'd like to know what percentage actually, follow the official story, follow your story, etc., or what they believe. It would be good to do a survey of them, and I will certainly endeavour to do that, because I think that's very important.
Good, yes, I couldn't agree more. Okay,
and then, perhaps I can even try and interview some of them if they would agree. I know it's a very difficult thing for a lot of people to talk about, especially on camera, but, if we can get their assistance, perhaps we can basically help spread the word with it and the information.
That'd be great. I would have loved to have got some feedback from them.
But of course, your hands are completely tied now. You wouldn't be able to do any of this that I'm talking about now, otherwise you'd be arrested, and we will come on to that.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Right. Now, we talk about the BBC conspiracy files. Now, what were your thoughts on that? Because they basically focused a great deal on your film, trying to discredit it. Give us your feelings on when you sat and watched the conspiracy files, because they did come after you, didn't they?
Oh yes, yeah, they definitely did. They contacted me initially by emails and asked me if I would take part in the program. Mm-hmm. And so I gave them my condition for taking part in the program. And I said to them that if they were to show my film as it is, unedited, on primetime television on BBC first, then after they broadcast the film, I would then help them and I would take part in the program. Mm-hmm. And of course they refused to do that. I said, we can't possibly do that, and will you answer these questions? And so I said, I've given you my condition for working with you, and you have refused to meet my terms. So no, I will not take part in your program, and I will not answer your questions. Mm-hmm. So, what they did really was they ambushed me on the street with cameras rolling and asked me loaded, absolutely evil questions that absolutely didn't deserve an answer anyway. But I had already told them that I would not take part in their program in any way unless they met my conditions, which they hadn't met. Okay. So I walked through the interviewer and the camera between them, and I walked off without saying a word.
Okay. And one thing that
I was absolutely disgusted.
Yeah. I think a lot of people were. Me included. But one thing that intrigues me about things like that is the two. I mean, how many were there? Were there two or three?
There were two of them.
A cameraman and a journalist.
There was a cameraman with a camera on his shoulder, right, and the interviewer, who was called Ollie Bootle.
Okay. One thing that intrigues me, they're probably quite ambitious BBC journalists, sort of maybe fairly young, sort of climbing the greasy pole, if you like.
Yeah.
What their true beliefs are. Do they think they are genuinely trying to discredit someone who is doing something bad, or do they realise? Are they in on the whole thing? What do you think? I mean, I know you probably don't actually know, but what would your gut feeling be? Do you think they know that it's a false flag?
They said they'd watched the film.
Right. So
if they watched 7/7 Ripple Effect, then they have to be in on it.